All right. This is the last night for the marriage class, and I think it's also last night for the video series. And so if you're in the video series, you can go ahead and be dismissed in just a moment. As you get ready to dismiss, so I want to mention that next week we're going to start a series on doctrine. And we're going to teach doctrine from a very practical point of view. You can call it doctrine, you can call it theology, but basically we're going to teach you what the Bible says and why. We have a lot of Christians that they know the Bible stories, but they don't know the Bible. And a lot of people come to churches and they know, well, I'm supposed to find a church that believes this and believes that, but they don't know why we believe that. So why do we believe the Bible is the Word of God? What do we believe about God, the Holy Spirit, Jesus Christ? What do we believe about eschatology, things to come? And so in this class, what I'm going to teach you is I'm going to teach you what I learned in Bible college. Pretty much you're going to get everything that I learned in that class. And possibly even a little bit more, I think. And because I think you're just as smart as I am. And so you ought to be able to digest what my wife is laughing. She thinks you're smarter than I am. But I believe you can learn just as well as any Bible college student can. And so we're going to teach it. I'm going to use the theological terms, and we're going to talk about doctrine, and we'll have fill-in-the-blank notes. And when you get finished, if you go through the whole series, you will have what you would have in a Bible college doctrine course. In fact, if you're thinking about going to Bible college in the future, you can take it for credit. Now, if you take it for credit, you have to complete certain requirements. You have to take some tests after each section. But they do offer to give you credit for it if you do follow through with that, with the classes in that way. But in this class, we're going to teach a very doctrinal study with a very practical application. The difference between what I got in Bible college and what I'm going to give to you is in Bible college, we got the information, but not a lot of practical application. And that's because of the purpose of the class. But in this class, I teach you doctrine, and I teach you how it affects your everyday life. And so we teach from a very practical point of view. For example, in theology, we study the names of God and why that's important and how that should affect our daily prayer life and our walk with the Lord and a very practical basis. And when I've taught this in the past, we've had people that have said over and over again that it's one of their favorite services, and they feel like they've learned more in that class than they've done in their entire Christian life. And so I think it'll be a very helpful class. We will also be offering, coming up here in just a few weeks, the Financial Peace University. Now, if you're saying, well, I want to do both classes, mine will be recorded and online, and you can download it and watch it, listen to it. But the Financial Peace University, if you've never done it, how many here have actually gone through the Financial Peace University class? Raise your hand, all right? So a good number of folks. And if you have any questions about what the class is all about or if it is beneficial, see one of these people. Again, raise your hand if you've gone to the class. These are one of the people you can see that will tell you whether or not it was worth the time and the effort of going through that class. And if you've not done it, I would encourage you to say, well, I'm doing pretty good in finances. You could always do better. And there's a lot of good information there that will help you, not only for yourself personally, but things you can share with others as well. And if you are struggling, if you've got debt or you're struggling with your monthly budget, this class will help you. And so I would encourage you to very strongly consider it. You can see Brother Clowen, ask him any questions about the class, and let him know that you want to take it. We do have to have a certain base number, so if not enough people sign up, we won't do the class. But I think a lot of you would be interested and would benefit from it. So please let him know, if possible even tonight, I'm interested in the class, and that way we can begin figuring out how many kits we need and for that, and to take that opportunity. And we're hoping to offer another alternative class. Some of you have taken my doctrine before, and we'll have a class that you'll be able to take as well. We'll announce on that next week as well. All right, so that takes care of that. So those in Brother Clowen's class and the video class can go ahead and be dismissed. And in my class, we'll go ahead and finish up our notes. And I don't know if we have any extra copies from last week. If you'll raise your hand, they will bring those to you. If you don't have them, it's the last pages of the notes. Let's see if I can see what page number we're looking at here. Page probably 23 and 24, I think, is the page numbers. And so if you want to get those copies of that, we're kind of summarizing what we've taught in this series and what we've covered. Now, last week I told you I passed out a little handout you could fill out for some input on the class. If you didn't get those, do we have any extras of those, Brother Mitchell? I didn't look back there, extra of these little handouts. If you have those, if you can pass them out. And we've also, I sent out today, I got delayed on it, but I sent out today an email. If you are registered for the class, the email gives you a link to do the same thing. And I would really appreciate if you take time to give me that input. On there, we ask you how you rate the usefulness of the class. We'd also ask what has helped you the most. For my information, it's just good to see what is it that helped you the most. And you can give me more than one answer in there, but if there's something in the lessons that say, boy, this lesson or this illustration or this part of the lesson really helped us out in our relationship. If you have a specific question that I haven't answered, I'll try to answer that for you. And then we're also looking for recommendations for a Hawaii date night. What do you do? And especially things that are inexpensive. We all can go out to Ruth's Chris Steakhouse and spend $100, but we can't afford to do that very often. And so what do you do for a date night that's relatively inexpensive? And be specific there. If you go to a certain spot or certain place to do something or whatever, that's helpful. And then any favorite restaurants, and again, especially ones that are affordable. It's nice to go to the expensive ones, but most of us can't afford to do that but once or twice a year. And so what are some affordable places that you found that you can go to for a date night as well? And one of the things that I mentioned last week, I think, and that we've been doing, is we've been doing at least once a month, we want to do a double date night where we go out with another couple and just enjoy some time of fellowship and fun together. For us especially, we find that's good because, for those of you that have young children, a date night is to get away from your kids. And to get time just for the two of you. Well, my wife and I, it's just the two of us. And so we're together 24/7 because we work together and we live together. And so for us, having a time with another couple is kind of a fun thing on the opposite direction. It may be something you might want to consider doing. And we're looking for suggestions like that for date night that might be helpful to you in that way and doing that. I did get one return on this with a question that I do want to try to answer just real quickly. And that is, we covered a lesson on dealing with pornography and sexual sin and how to deal with that, and talked a lot in there about especially husbands that are struggling in this area, what they need to do. And that's something that more men struggle with than women do. Generally, although in today's society it's becoming a woman's problem as well, but for different reasons. But the question was, how does a wife deal with a husband that's involved in pornography, and how does she cope with that and dealing with that? And there's a couple of things. One is there has to be there's a lot of good material out there, and I think that you want to get into that material, just like I talked with the men. For example, Covenant Eyes has a section that deals with spouses of those struggling with pornography. And I think Covenant Eyes is probably one of the best online resources for both men and women that are struggling in this area. And even if you don't struggle with it, I encourage you maybe to take a look there so that you have that to share with others, to encourage them to go to. They've just done a real good job with that. And they've got literature in there that deals with women primarily that their spouses are into pornography. There's books that are written that help out. One of the biggest things is just to know that you're not alone, that you're not the only one, and that there's others that have been there, done that, and survived it. And a lot of times when you're reading somebody who's been there and done that, they empathize, they understand, and they're able to share things that are more helpful to you in that way. And so I would encourage you to take a look at those resources and see what's available there in doing that. And I think the same things that apply to men apply to the women as well, and that is that if you're struggling with this, with your spouse into pornography, you need what men need. And what I said is they need an accountability partner. They need somebody that's praying for them and encouraging them and helping them through the difficult times and holding them accountable. And I think that the wife needs the same thing. She needs an accountability partner. She needs somebody that she can talk to and pray with and seek advice and help from, and just to be able to open up with. And now the problem is one of the things was in the question, how do you do that without reflecting bad on your spouse? And probably most men don't want their wives going to somebody and talking about this problem that they're having, especially if they're not willing to deal with it. But this is one of those areas where, you know what, you're just going to have to say to your spouse, you got a problem, and this is my problem too, and I need help. And I'm going to have to go get somebody to talk to. And this is a place where you might need to say to a spouse, you're going to need to say to them, I'm going to go talk to somebody, and whether or not, it's not a matter of permission, it's just to let you know. Don't do it behind their back, but at the same time, you do need to get somebody where you can talk to them and where you can be open and transparent and cry a little bit and pray with them. Now, who you choose is important. Anytime you're looking for an accountability partner or a prayer partner for some issue like this, whether it's pornography or whatever else it is, the person you choose is critical. It has to be somebody godly and somebody you can trust. It has to be somebody that's not going to talk to anyone else except to you and the Lord, and that's it. And so it has to be somebody that you have full confidence in, that's not going to reveal your problems, that's not going to talk about it, and is not going to be judgmental. It's somebody that is not going to, every time they see your husband, they're going to give him dirty looks, give him stink eye and all the rest of it. It's not going to be judgmental. And those kind of people are hard to find. And you have to be real careful, real prayerful, and real careful in who you pick to talk to. And you have to be careful that it's somebody that you need to be able to be open with and transparent with, but you want to be careful not to be critical of your spouse with. And there's a balance with that. You've got to talk about the issues. You've got to talk about the problem. You've got to talk about, this is how I feel. It's devastating me. It's tearing me up inside. I'm broken. You've got to be able to do that so that they can honestly and openly pray for you. And they can also every once in a while reach over and smack you a little bit. And that's the other criteria when you're looking for an accountability partner, whether you're a man or a woman, is it's got to be somebody that's not afraid to tell you the truth. Is not afraid to be very blunt and very direct with you in a loving and a kind way, but not to hold back. And sometimes you need somebody that's going to say to you, yeah, you've got a problem, but you know what? Get over it and work on your relationship and do the things that you need to do. And so you need to find somebody like that. And what you want to do is just sit down with your husband and say, listen, you've got a problem. And it's my problem, and I need somebody I can talk to. I need somebody that I can open up with and I can pray with. I'm going to choose them carefully. I'm not out to be critical of you. And I'm going to be very careful that they're not going to talk to others about you as well. And it may not be a happy thing for them, but you need that. You need somebody that you can turn to in that way. And so you want to look for that when you go out looking for that person. And so I hope that helps. And again, I would highly recommend Covenant Eyes. We've got some books. I've got a number of books that deal with both the sexual relationship and pornography for both the man and the woman. They're in my office. We don't put them out where the kids can get a hold of them. And if you would like to look at those books and borrow some of them, be glad to do that. And again, there's a lot of good resources online that you can go to as well. And if you need to talk to somebody, I'm available to do that. My wife and I can sit down and counsel with you if you're a wife. And if you're a man, I'll sit down and counsel with you and work with you on that as well. But as I said in that lesson, there are certain besetting sins that you will never truly get victory over until you're willing to ask for prayer and you're willing to ask for help, to confess your faults one to another and to say, I need accountability. I need somebody to provoke me unto love and to good works and to challenge me in this area. All right, let's take a look at our notes. And if you have other questions, we'll try to answer those before we finish up this series and begin next week, and then we'll start into our doctrine series. But as we look at our notes, we're just kind of summarizing the lessons that we talked about. We're on page number, I'm not sure exactly where you are. It was Roman number 3. Why are we so different? We talked about we're different by personality. We're different by creation. We're different by choices. I'll tell you, as I talk to people, and ask them what's helped you the most in the lessons, this is probably the area that's most practically helpful. When you really begin to understand that your spouse is not doing it on purpose. We see what they do as on purpose. We see it based upon our point of view, that if I were doing that, this is why I would do it. Whereas a lion has different motivations than a beaver or a retriever, and a woman has different motivations than a man does. And our background motivates us in so many ways and changes us. And this is probably the most practical lesson, the most helpful in your daily lives. And I would encourage you, if you review anywhere of the notes, I think this would be a good area to go back and review and to talk about how different we are and to find strength in your differences. differences? How can you help me to be better in my weak areas, and how can I help you to be better in your weak areas? How can I understand you better and help you to understand me better in my motivations, the reason I do what I do, and to begin that discussion. As we talked about, you can find strength in your differences, or what a lot of people use is they look at this information, they use an excuse. Well, that's just the way I am. And we can accuse one another. See, you're acting like a lion, you're acting like a woman, or whatever it might be. Or we can use the information to make us stronger in our relationship. All right, so we're on room number 4, and this is where we stopped at, I believe. And you must learn to communicate. You must learn to communicate. One of the important things that we've got to do as we continue in our relationship is learn how to communicate with one another. I think if there's any weak areas in my relationship, this is probably the weakest area. Now you would think, well, Pastor, you're a communicator. You do that for a living, and you communicate the messages all the time. But there's a difference with communicating this way than there is on a one-to-one basis. And we've really got to learn how to communicate with each other, and that's a two-way street. It's give and take. Both learning how to listen to the other person and learning how to help them to understand what you're feeling and what you're thinking as well. And so as we looked at this, we talked about how we need to build a word picture. Words are good, and a picture is worth 1,000 words. And so if I can give my spouse a picture, a verbal picture of what I'm thinking or what I'm feeling, then that saves me 1,000 words. And especially if we're men, we've got a lot fewer words than our wife does. And so if we can draw pictures, we're going to do a lot better in communicating with one another. And so we need to work on building a better word picture. And so that starts with our love language. How many of you have read the book, The 5 Love Languages? Raise your hand. How many have read that book? I'm kind of disappointed. I expected probably a lot more hands to be raised. If there's any, I know we've raised societies of people who are not readers anymore, and I know most of us don't read very much, but this is available as an audio book as well. It's available electronically on Kindle and other sources, and it's available as a printed book. And if there's a classic book on marriage from the Christian perspective, this is the classic. This is the one that I think you ought to read at some point or another, and even to read again. And so the 5 love languages. And the author's premise is that everybody speaks a different love language. We live in a church, we are a church that has 30 different nationalities. And so we have people in this room that speak Korean and Filipino and about 70 different dialects of Filipino, and we've got Micronesians, and we've got Samoans, and all the rest of it. And just like in Acts, if all of us were to start speaking in our own language, it would be very confusing. We wouldn't understand each other. And so we need to try to learn that person's language. Many of you are in a cross-cultural marriage, and your partner speaks another language, especially that's their first language. English is their second language. And that always creates challenges. Now, I always respect the spouses that try to learn their spouse's language, because I think that's a good thing to do, and that shows a level of love and commitment in your relationship. And one of the reasons you need to learn their language is because usually when someone gets mad, they revert back to their first language. And so you've got to know all of the angry words. And so you know what they're saying to you when they're mad, if nothing else. And if somebody came up to me as a pastor and said, "Pastor, I love you. You're a great pastor. You preach great messages," but they did it in Samoan or Korean or Ilocano or Chuukese or whatever language it is, I would not understand. They could say very nice things about me, but I would not be able to understand it at all. And so we need to make sure we understand that our spouse's love language. And there's 5 of them. And the first one is, the first of the love languages is the words of touch, physical touch. And that is that some people feel loved when they're touched physically. They need to hold hands. They need to snuggle up. They need you to rub their shoulders. It's usually non-sexual physical touch, but often it includes the sexual physical touch. So if you're not having a good sexual relationship, they're feeling unloved by that. But most of the time, it's more of a non-sexual touch that they need. And if you don't touch them enough, they don't feel loved because they need that physical touch. whereas the second one is words of affirmation. And that's when they need to hear it verbally, that I love you, you're special, you're important, you're beautiful, whatever it might be. And basically, what they need to hear is specifics. They don't need a generic, I love you. They need, I love you because. They don't need a generic, you're beautiful or you're handsome. They need to hear the specific things that are beautiful or handsome about you. And so they're looking for specific words of affirmation, whether it's verbal or written. But they need to hear that often. They need to hear you say, I love you. They need to hear you say these words over and over again. They can't hear it enough. And then the third language is quality time together. It's just they need you in their presence. They don't need you to say anything. They don't need you to touch them. They don't need you to do anything. Just be there. And when you're not there, they don't feel loved. And so if you don't spend enough time with them, they feel unloved. And this is very difficult for those of you in the military because a lot of times you're off somewhere for months at a time or even longer. And you've got a long time at work. And so that makes it more difficult to be able to accomplish that. And if you have those times of separation, you've got to find a way to make them feel like you're there. And there are little things you can do. For example, one of the things we recommend when couples go, when one or the other goes off on deployment and they're separated, is to read a book together while you're apart. And so you pick out a book and you're going to both read a chapter a week. And while you're reading it, you can feel like that person's there reading it with you. Or to do devotions together. You set up some specific devotions you're going to do and you both do it every day. And no matter what time you're doing it, you can feel like while you're doing it with your partner because they're over there. And there's other things you can do. You can leave things for them to let them feel your presence. Many times a person that the quality time together, many times when their husband's gone, they'd like to have his shirt, laying on the bed or wrapped around the pillow or something like that because it just makes them feel like they're close together. So what are some practical things I can do to help that person feel like I'm there with them even when I'm not? And providing for that. And then receiving gifts is another love language. I feel loved when you give me something. It doesn't have to be the big, expensive diamond ring. It could be a flower. It could be a card. It can be my favorite candy bar. It's the fact that you thought about me and you got something that meant something to me. It can't be just random. It's got to be something with some kind of a meaning, some kind of a token interest in the other person that shows that I care about you. And so these are the 5 love languages, and what's important for you to know is what is your partner's love language and what is your love language as well, and how those connect with one another. Because many times you can be speaking the opposite language. You can tell your wife, I love her 100 times a day, but if her love language is touch and you don't touch her enough, she's going to feel unloved. And so you've got to speak that language specifically that your partner is needing. Now, we all need all 5. We all like all 5, but there's what did I say? Did I give you only 4? Yeah. Words, quality, receiving gifts, acts of service. I'm sorry, there's the other one. Acts of service, and that's when you do things for your partner. It's like a husband washing dishes for his wife. It's like a wife making lunch for her husband. It's acts of service for your spouse, where you're showing your love by doing something for them that meets a need in their life. And so we got to look at these 5. Usually you can look at it. Most time you can eliminate your number 5 pretty quick. You can say, well, this is my least important. And you can narrow it down to 4 and just work your way up from there. And there's times in your life where these kind of swap out a little bit, and you need one more than the other, but we usually put them in order, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And that way we need to make sure that we are providing that for the other person and helping them to understand how they can provide that for us as well. Along with that, we have the ways we communicate. We listen differently. Some people are very visual listeners. They have to see it. That's why they like drawings on the board. They like to have pictures to look at. They like graphs. I see what you're saying. Look at this. They're very visual listeners, where other people are auditory listeners, and they tend to say things like, well, that sounds good, or I hear what you're saying, and they don't need all the pictures and all the drawings and graphs. They just need you to speak it, and they're just good listeners, and they like to listen to things. And then you have the the kinesthetic listeners, and they like to highlight things in the book. You know, when they read a book, they use a highlighter. They draw pictures. You know, when you see their notes from college, they've got all kinds of pictures drawn on the side there. They like to touch. If you can use something that they can physically grab hold of, like the other day when in my sermon I dumped that dirt out, that kind of listener, they like that because that's something they can feel and they can touch and they can handle, and so it helps them in their listening. They usually say things like, I sense what you're feeling, or that feels good to me. And so you need to understand how your spouse listens, because if you're lecturing them and they're not a listener primarily, then they're not going to hear what you're saying. You've got to come from a different perspective. And then how they communicate. Men, they see women like a mirror. They want women to reflect back what they're saying, where women see men like a window. They want to see inside of them. And so we have a different way of communicating in that way. We need to understand that. And dealing with that. Men tend to share facts, and women tend to share feelings. And women want to talk with you, men want to talk at you. And we also need to learn how to talk to the animal. You got to talk to a lion very differently than you talk to a retriever. If you don't talk loud and clear and to the point with a lion, you're going to lose them very quickly. And you got to talk to a beaver different than you do a retriever or an otter. And so make sure you understand that identity and how you can talk to them and communicate with them in a way that they will understand in doing that. And then number 3 there is we need to make sure how we define our words. The definition of our words is very, very important. This is what gets a lot of us in trouble. I know myself especially, is we've got to make sure we're both defining our words the same way. Because if we're not, then we're in trouble. If you're thinking a few is 1 or 2, and your partner's thinking a few is 6 or 7, that's a big problem. And so you've got to make sure you're defining your words equivalently and together there. Later, what does later mean to you? Later to me means sometime in the future, probably ain't going to happen. Later to my wife means sometime within the next 24 hours or less. And so we have a lot of problems with that word later. And so we've got to work on defining our terms better. And that's both a give and a take. I've got to be careful when I use the term that I make sure my spouse understands what I mean by that. And my spouse needs to be careful to understand, what do you mean by that? When you say later, can you tell me when that's going to happen, or if it is ever going to happen or not? And trying to define that so you're not disappointed or hurt when it doesn't happen the way you expected. And also trying to come up with different ways to say the same thing. This is one of the things that gets a lot of us in trouble. Again, depending on personality or other areas, is what we're saying. The way we say it was what makes the problem. We need to come up with, it's kind of like using a thesaurus, where we try to come up with a better word for saying the same thing. It's like when you call somebody cheap, that sounds like you're saying a bad thing about them. Now, I don't think it is, but the word cheap has a bad connotation. So you can say something like parsimonious, which means cheap. It just sounds better. You're very parsimonious, and it just sounds a whole lot better. And so trying to work on your wording and the way you say things. And along with that, we have to look at things like tone of voice and attitude and body language. 7% of communication by study is the content, the actual words that you use. 38% of communication is the tone of your voice. So the tone you use says more than the words you use. And then 55% of communication is nonverbal body language. And so that's why it's very important. We need to realize we communicate a whole lot more by how we say it and how we look when we say it than we do by what we actually say. And that's very, very critical in understanding that. So we need to just kind of stop, look, and listen. We need to stop, look, and listen. Stop long enough to hear what your spouse is saying. Stop long enough to hear what your spouse is saying. We don't do that very well. And we've got to stop and listen. And there's all kinds of ways of going about that. You've all heard the thing where before you give your answer to your spouse, you've got to tell them what they said in your own words. And that makes you stop and listen. They can say, no, that's not what I said. And you got to go back over it. Because most of the time, when my wife is telling me something, especially negative or something is wrong, instead of listening to her, I am in the process of my mind of building up, first of all, my defenses. How am I going to defend against this? And then my offense, how am I going to attack back? Well, and I'm looking for my response rather than for listening to what she's trying to say. And so we've got to work at not doing that. And so how do we make that happen? How do we take time to stop long enough to hear, to look beneath the surface, no pun intended there, but to look below what they're just saying? What is the underlying problem? Maybe there's another issue going on here. Maybe there's another reason that they're doing what they're doing. I've been suffering with some insomnia problems, and when I get tired, boy, I'm not very good at communication. And it's important for my wife to look beyond and say, well, he's tired, and that's why he's saying what he's saying, or he's doing what he's doing, and to look to the deeper problem here. Is there some insecurity? Maybe your wife is feeling insecure right now. Are they feeling unrespected as a husband? Is that why they're saying or doing what they're doing here? So I've got to look below the surface. I've got to see what's really going on here underneath that, and then listen to and with the heart. Not just the words that are coming out of the mouth, but what is coming from the heart. And many times I've seen where a husband or wife says something really hurtful, but really what's going on inside their heart is they're scared for the relationship right now. And the way it's coming out is very bad, but where it's coming from in the heart is really, I'm afraid of losing you. I'm afraid that something going to happen here, and they're reacting in the wrong way. So we've got to look deeper to see what's going on there, and that's very, very important in that process. You need to ought your thoughts. The Bible says in Matthew chapter 5 and Mark chapter 11, if your brother have aught against you, or you have aught against your brother, ought your thoughts. And the word ought is just like thought without the TH there. But, you've got to talk about. If you've got a problem, don't just assume they know the problem. Don't just assume that they intended to hurt you. Say, hey, what you did hurt. Don't assume they know that. And so ought your thoughts. And a lot of times we have this attitude in our mind, if they got a problem with me, they can come to me. No, it's whether you have ought against them or they have ought against you. It doesn't matter whose fault it is. You need to go and deal with that issue and work that out. And then you need to pass your praise. You need to make sure that you're taking a few moments to praise your spouse and to tell them what you do appreciate. You can go to Proverbs chapter 31. You've all heard the plus minus plus sandwich, to say something good and then say you're negative and then say something good again. To make sure you reinforce you are such a good husband that this one thing is really where the problem is, but I appreciate all these other things about you. That be willing to praise. And it's a whole lot easier when you come to your spouse with a problem, when you've also been coming to them a lot more with all the good things. When you're telling them all the time, what a wonderful husband, what a great wife, I appreciate you doing this, I appreciate you doing that. One of the things that I don't do enough is tell my wife when she makes food how much I appreciate it, how good it is. I'm quick to tell her I don't like that or I don't want to eat that. But I've got to be also quick to tell her, hey, thank you for making that. Don't take it for granted. We just don't do that enough. And we've got to be fast to pass the praise. In Proverbs 31 and verse number 28, it says, her children rise up and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praises her. And so we've got to take that time to praise one another and to be positive. Both when there's a problem, sandwich it in praise, but just be the person that's always saying positive things. And that way, when you have one negative, you've got 10 positives you've already put in the bank, so to speak, that help to make that easier to deal with when it does come up. So learn to argue, not to fight. In Ephesians chapter 4, it talks about this, and we went through that in detail. You need to be honest. Open, honest communication is the key to any relationship. The problem here, the biggest problem, the open, honest relationship, is when your spouse is not willing to hear the truth. And so you've got to be willing to hear the truth, no matter, the truth hurts, speaking the truth in love, and you've got to be willing to hear that truth and to accept it without feeling like you're being torn apart or feeling like your spouse is saying there's nothing good about you because this one thing is wrong. Well, this one thing is wrong. Doesn't mean everything else is bad, but to be honest. So a lot of times we're not honest with each other. What's wrong, honey? Nothing. when there is something wrong. And we're not honest with each other, or if we do talk about a problem, we kind of beat around the bush and never really get to the real problem. Well, this hurt what you said. Well, it's not what they said that hurt. It's the underlying problem that's there that really hurt. We need to get to what is really going on here and what is really the ultimate problem that is here. So that open, honest communication is very, very important. You've got to be honest with each other. And then secondly, we need to not only we need to be current. We need to be current. And that is that we've got to make sure that we are current in whatever the problem is. Don't let it hang around. Don't all of a sudden you're dealing with a problem now that happened 2 weeks ago, but you're only dealing with it now. A lot of times, like I talked about, it's that credit card effect where we've let these things build up and we've just kind of charged and charged and charged, and then all of a sudden the account is full and now they're paying for weeks worth of issues in that one argument. And so you've got to be current. You've got to take care of a problem now. Sometime within the next 24 hours, sometime at the very least, if you can't deal with it in the next 24 hours, you're both going to agree, we're going to come back to this and deal with it at this point and resolve this issue as well. So we need to be current, because we're not current. Hurts lead to anger, anger leads to resentment, resentment leads to bitterness, and we attack one another. Or hurt leads to anger, which leads to self-pity and depression, and you attack yourself. But either way, we're building up. In Ephesians chapter 5, it talks about let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and evil speaking be put away with all malice. And it's a progression. These things build. As we hold on to the bitterness, it becomes wrath, and that's boiling over. It begins to build up pressure inside of us. And then it becomes anger or resentment, and that becomes clamor, loud quarreling and arguing and talking negatively about evil speaking. And then it leads to malice, and everything is bad in the relationships. We've got to be careful not to let that happen. And then be industrious. You got to work at overcoming these problems. Understand not only the what, but the why. Try to learn and to grow through this problem. A lot of times we argue and it never accomplishes anything. We never grow through that argument, and we just end up dealing with the same problem again and again and again. And then we need to work to do the things that need to happen to change it. And then be edifying. How can I build this person up? You don't make somebody better by tearing them down. And so when you're arguing, be careful to not to use negative words and to tear the other person down. Try to build them up and make them stronger so they can deal with these things. And not only what are the ways I can verbally build them up, but what are the things that I can do to help them through this issue? If your spouse's love language is touch, then be physically affectionate with them. You work at holding hands and having that physical contact with them. What can I do to build them up in this process? And then number 5 there is to be kind. To be kind. Don't act, don't react. I'm sorry. Most time we react to the circumstances instead of acting in the way that we should. And we're not Holy Spirit controlled. The fruit of the Spirit, we ought to be practicing most often with one another. So resolve how you will solve your problems, what it comes down to. In Ephesians chapter 4, there's an excellent passage to study through on this area of communication. And then we need to learn to argue, not to fight. How can we argue and not fight with one another? When we fight, we attack each other. When we argue, we attack the problem. So we need to work on doing that. And then number 5, going down there, is we talked about intimacy. Intimacy is intimacy. And we talked about, first of all, a personal intimacy. And that is learning how to, just to be intimate in a personal way, which includes, first of all, emotional intimacy. Learning to be emotionally intimate with one another and being transparent and being open and dealing with our problems and our issues with one another and working through those things. So learning to have that personal intimacy. Personal intimacy creates a lasting love. Sex without love is like a camera without film. If you remember what cameras and film are, it is like having no battery. It's not gonna last. And so we need to build the personal intimacy in the relationship as well. Now, sex without intimacy, emotional intimacy frustrates a woman. Sex without intimacy without sex frustrates a man. He needs, if he's going to be personally intimate with you, he's going to need the sex. And so it's a kind of an opposite direction. So we talk about emotional intimacy. That's laughing together, playing together, going out on dates together, talking and listening to one another. And again, that's one of the things that's missing in a lot of our relationships is we don't take time to build that personal intimacy with each other, and we need to work at that. And then physical intimacy is, of course, the bond that comes physically, not talking here directly about sex. This is things like holding hands, snuggling, kissing, massage, rubbing the shoulders, things like that. It's learning how to be physically intimate. As an observer of couples, because I'm a counselor of couples so often, I watch couples, and when I see a couple in the church that very rarely do I ever see them holding hands or touching, that usually is a red flag. Now, I realize not everybody is physical. In fact, some people are very opposite of that. Some people just don't like to be touched, and there's usually something in their background that's a reason for that, the way they were raised or some other reason, and that may not be their number one love language. But I do believe that a couple that's got a good relationship is going to be intimate physically. They're going to be touchy with each other to a certain extent, both in public and out of public. Of course, in public appropriately, but they want to have that physical touch, whether it's at night to snuggle up together. And again, that's a problem if you're different sleepers. I'm a stomach sleeper. My wife is a back sleeper, and that makes it very hard for us to sleep together and be able to snuggle very long. I can turn around and hold her for about a certain amount of time, then I got to turn over my stomach again. I can't stay on my side like that, and especially if I want to go to sleep. And when we were first married, she used to get very upset with me when I would turn away from her, and she thought I was being, I didn't love her anymore because I didn't want to snuggle up. It wasn't a personal thing, but yet she needed that, so we learned that we need to do that at a certain amount of time. And there's other things like that. You need to develop that physical intimacy. And then the mental intimacy as well. And with the mental intimacy, that's talking about things that are going on in the world, talking about your finances, talking about what spiritual things, reading together, having devotions together. That develops the mental intimacy. And I didn't put it on here, but the spiritual intimacy as well. Praying together, reading your Bible together, going to church together, and learning together is important as well. And the 4 C's is not in your notes of intimacy is companionship, confidence. Companionship is you can't be like two ships passing the night. What really worries me is when I see a couple where both of them work, and especially on different shifts. I'll hear a couple say, "Well, I work days and he works nights so that we can watch the kids." Well, that's okay financially, but that ain't okay marriage-wise. And that's going to lead to problems. You cannot be like two ships passing through the night. You've got to have that companionship where you have time where it's the two of you together as a couple. And then confidence in your relationship. Trust each other with your thoughts. Trust each other with your feelings. Trust each other with your body. You cannot be intimate with somebody you're not confident with. If your wife is not confident, if she tells you something, or if your husband's not confident, if he tells you something, then there's no intimacy because he can't trust you with it. If you're going to use it against him later on in an argument, well, you said this, or if you're going to tell somebody else about it, or whatever it might be, or judge him because of it, they're not going to be intimate. They're not going to open up with you. They have to have confidence in you. And so it's very, very important. Communication. You need to have good, solid communication. If you want intimacy, you got to communicate with each other, talk about things, share your feelings, share your thoughts, be able to talk about what's going on in your lives. And then commitment. If you want to be intimate, you've got to know that they're committed to you. They're committed to you and the relationship. And there's not a question on that. When there's a lack of commitment, you cannot be intimate. And then consistent. When you're inconsistent, when one time you're up and another time you're down, and it's back and forth, that inconsistency it takes away intimacy. And so you've got to be consistent in reaction, and that's important. And then we have sexual intimacy. The marriage bed is honorable and undefiled, and went through a whole lesson talking about that. It's interesting to me when the Bible talks about leaving your father and mother, you cleave to one another, be glued together, and you're one flesh. And so that means that sex is not the only thing that marriage is about. but I do believe that the sexual relationship is a good indicator of the marriage relationship, and I believe it's one of those merry-go-round things. You cannot have a good marriage without having a good physical relationship, and you can't have a good physical relationship that's going to make for a good marriage. And you just got to, if you're having problems in that area, you've got to fix them. You've got to work at that. There's going to be ups and downs, and there's going to be good times and bad, and you're going to have struggles at certain points as life changes and as you change. But you've got to stay on top of it, because you need to have a good, solid physical relationship to have a good marriage. And so they're something that goes together and very, very important from that basis. All right, we also talked about 1 Corinthians 13. I'm not going to go through that again because we just finished it. And so this pretty much finishes up the notes and what we've been going through. If you'd like, I can send you, I can email you a copy of my filled-in notes. It's got all my little additional notes in there and things like that, so you can catch up on what you might have missed. If you will email me, the best way to do is email me, and then I'll email you back the copy of the notes. I'm going to scan them to a PDF, and then I'll email them back to you that way of my complete set of notes if you want that. We gave out articles with each of the lessons. If you want a copy of the articles, I can also send you that. If you feel like you didn't get all of them, I can send you a PDF copy of that. And so if you want both of those, you're welcome to them. We are working on taking this whole series and putting it in a very specific spot that you can go and just click on it, get the videos, get the audio, get the lessons, get the devotions, and get all of the materials in one spot so that you can review it and also you can share it with others. There's a lot of people that I've heard of that have been watching this series online, and it's helped them. And you may have some friends, some family members that this would be helpful to. You might want to recommend it to them. If they're not saved, what I would recommend is have them listen to the lesson on the differences, the animals and the male-female. Listen to that one first, because that kind of hooks them in, and then to go back and listen to the rest of it. The first, the lessons, a lot of Bible, if they're an unsaved person, they may get, kind of thrown off by that. I'm not ashamed of that, and I believe the Bible's God's plan for the marriage is what we need to learn. But if they're not saved, they don't necessarily understand that. So that lesson kind of helps go with that one. I think it's around number 10 or 12 or something along that line, and that's where you can recommend them to. We do have most of the lessons on YouTube. We haven't kept up with that. By the way, Pastor Caleb could use some help. Keeping up with all of the audio, video, and technical stuff with the sound room is a major job. We've lost a couple of people that helped out with it and could use some more people to jump in, both in the sound room with the video cameras and with the follow-up, getting everything up to date on our webpage and YouTube and the rest of it. If you would like to do that, some you do during the services like these guys are doing now, and some you can do from home on your own computer, but you have to commit to it. Because it's one of those things, if you say, I'll do it, and then you don't do it, it's very frustrating. Because if you're not doing it, we don't want to do it because we asked you to do it. We can't do it until you get it done, and then we're sitting there waiting for it to get done. And so we need some help with this to get it all together and put it together in a format that's available to everybody. And so again, if you can go online, and right here is the address for where to go online if you didn't get the email. You only got the email if you're registered in the class. And so you can grab one of this, come up here and copy that address down to take that survey online. Or if you didn't get one of the cards, see Brother Mitchell, and he can give you one to fill out and put it in my mail slot or give it to my wife. If you give it to me, I'll never see it again. All right, let's go ahead and stand for dismissing a word of prayer.